This week is Dude Week. Yesterday was International Men's Day, and it was a bit of a damp squib this year compared to other years. It wasn't quite as harsh and nasty towards men as previous International Men's Days have been, but it still was a bit lackluster. So I decided, triggered as I was by certain events, to make this whole week of videos about men and men's issues, because I'm a dude, I've got junk, and I have issues. So today we're going to talk about male role models. Now, this International Men's Day's focus was supposed to be on male role models, but there was very little content about that. Now, I'm not going to decry the attention that is given to men's mental health issues, particularly male suicide and so on. That's all incredibly worthwhile, and it's a great thing, and I'm glad that a lot of people devote their time to raising awareness and talking about those issues on International Men's Day. But one of the most striking differences between International Women's Day and International Men's Day is that Women's Day is as much a celebration of the good and wonderful and great things about women as it is about addressing women's issues, while Men's Day doesn't really celebrate men. It's very much focused on how we're wrong, how we're broken, how we need to change, how we can be better allies to women. It always seems to be twisted around and made into something about how you can be a better ally to feminism or whatever else, if you're begrudgingly given a talk or anything. So talking about role models would be a good thing. That would kind of move that to being more positive and holding up positive examples of men and about men. But that was largely absent, so I'm going to try and redress that balance a little bit here and talk about my role models in general. And then at the end, I'm going to address one of the questions that I've had in the comments, because some of the others fall under topics that I plan to do later on. Role models have always struck me as a little bit silly. They're like an unattainable standard that you look up to. It doesn't seem to make sense to have role models to do that. Yeah, there's everyday role models, but most people are talking about someone famous or influential. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but I did for the purposes of this video. And I found a common thread to the kinds of people that I look up to or would aspire to be like if I was daft enough to do so. And one of those is Alan Moore. Alan Moore is an extremely talented writer. He works in a medium that I particularly like, comic books. He helped them grow up and become something more mature. He brings that kind of intelligent literary focus to the medium that helps silence critics. So that's all good. But also in his personal life, he's interested in history. He's a man who lives without compromise. He's turned away Hollywood money and stayed true to his principles and his beliefs, and he has articulated his beliefs in a way that isn't hectoring and evangelical, but is perhaps all the more influential because of it. And when he hit middle age, I'm having to paraphrase because I couldn't find the exact quote, but he said something like, when you have your midlife crisis, most people date a younger woman, buy a nice red sports car or whatever. I decided to go mad and become a wizard. And who can't be inspired by that? My second choice would be, well, there's no particular order, but the second one that came to mind was Christopher Hitchens. There's a lot of things that I did not agree with Christopher Hitchens about, but he always put an intelligent and factual case for the things that he believed in, and he had a very scathing wit, and he was uncompromising again and steadfast in the face of criticism, though he was able to admit occasionally when he was wrong. But the most powerful thing about him for me was not his skill as an orator or a rhetorician, but the stoicism, the strength and the unbending will with which he went through his encounter with cancer at the end of his life. It would have been so easy for a man like him to weaken in his stances, to take a step back, to fall beneath the unconscionable attacks against his atheism that were rooted in his imminent death. You know, he could have backed down, he could have stopped making appearances, he could have stopped making the arguments. But instead, he stood firm, and he faced his cancer, his imminent death, with an unquiet courage. He continued to rage right up to the end, almost. And that kind of grit and determination and steadfastness, and, you know, being an uncompromising, cantankerous, witty, erudite bastard, is definitely something I can appreciate. There's a few others I could probably mention and bring up. Terry Pratchett, I had the good fortune to meet a couple of times, and he was always a gentleman and a scholar and a lovely fella, and I appreciated his sense of humour and the weird and the bizarre and the nonsensical very much. There are others, figures in the role-playing industry that most of you would never have heard of, you know, things like that. But for my third choice, if I was limiting myself to 3, I had to choose Douglas Adams. Now, he's slightly out of step with the other two. Alan Moore and Christopher Hitchens, both notoriously difficult, cantankerous old bastards. Whereas Douglas Adams, who unfortunately was taken from us too soon, pretty much everyone seemed to say that he was a fairly affable, gentle chap. Well, that just meant he could kind of slip the knife into your ribs rhetorically when you weren't expecting it. You know, he was polite and calm and had those kind of British qualities that I admire, and which a British gentleman is expected to uphold. But at the same time, he was sarcastic and scathing, and again witty and erudite, and was able to poke and prod with skill and aplomb things about British society and the absurdity of society as a whole. He was also an early adopter of a lot of technology, and he was way ahead of the curve when it came to, I guess, celebrity engagement with environmental issues and so on. So I had to choose him, though there were, you know, other contenders, like I said, Neil Gaiman, Stephen Fry, people like that. I think you can see the pattern that runs through the kinds of people that I admire who are famous and generally known. In my personal life, I don't necessarily regard people I'm going to talk about as role models per se, but rather influences. But they're the kinds of things that people would normally consider to be role models. I mean, obviously, my father had a great deal of influence on my life. He has always been quite idealistic and loud about the things he believes and why, to the point where I held him to such a ridiculous standard that it kind of came between us a bit later on in life. If I had to choose one, and my friends are hugely influential as well. You know, I admire different aspects about them, their dedication, their ability to cope, the raw sexual energy that some of them seem to have, their success with women. You know, these are things that I'm envious of, or would aspire to be, perhaps. But if I'm going to take a more personal one, it's a bit of an odd one. because my grandfather, on my mother's side, Norman, he was just kind of there through a lot of my life. Both my grandparents were very stoic. You know, they'd been through the war and everything, and they didn't open up very much, but they were both very strong. My grandmother faced down cancer with the kind of stern pluck that Hitchens did. My grandfather died trying to save their dog from drowning, which is a brave way to go. But what made me really appreciate my grandfather, I didn't know about him until after he was dead. He never spoke much about his experiences in the war. I knew he was a sapper. I knew he was in the Wiltshire Regiment. I know that he was injured by a detonated mine and had metal in his leg up until the day he died from that. But what I didn't know, and what I didn't find out until after he was dead, was that he was amongst the soldiers who liberated Belsen. And Belsen was one of the nastiest, harshest Nazi camps that there were. And I only really found out because of an artifact, a stick that was given to him, apparently, by people who were liberated from Belsen, which I'm putting pictures up of. This woodwormy stick is one of the few things to come out of Belsen, because in trying to control disease and parasites, and out of sheer horror and disgust at what they had discovered there, the soldiers demolished and flamethrowered Belsen. People there were so wasted and so starved that special diets had to be devised to try and wean them back onto food. And he never spoke about this. Not once. And looking back, reflecting on it, that makes his kind of quiet stoicism and subtle humour something I can appreciate even more. And my grandmother was probably not the easiest person to live with, and yet he endured that with good humour and good faith. And, you know, despite being a physical, crafts-oriented man who had been through, or at least seen, the face of hell, you know, he always had a smile on his face, a subtle joke, and he encouraged me in my more intellectual pursuits, even though it wasn't his thing at all. So when it comes to a personal basis, he's someone that I admire a great deal, but like a lot of men, he never talked about the things that I have ended up really appreciating him for. Now, some people have said that they consider me to be a role model. I can only think that they're out of their minds. The reasons they give are things that they admire how outspoken I am about various issues, particularly mental health issues, depression and suicide, and the fact that I keep working away, keep doing stuff even though I'm ill. Well, part of the reason that I am outspoken on these issues is selfish. And it's not selfish in the sense that, oh yeah, obviously I want more help for people who are depressed or suicidal or whatever, because I am, and I want more help. It's a big part of it is because I feel I have reached the limit of what I can do when it comes to self-care, and that's hugely and immensely frustrating. To be stuck with this illness and not to be able to see a path to get really any better other than just coping, if you follow. So a big part of the reason that I am vocal and that I reach out and I talk about these things is because I get something from knowing that other people are being helped. So in a way, I'm helping people in order to help myself, and that's not really a worthy thing, I don't think, for anyone to consider me a role model. As regards my work, I've had some success in the past, but not that much, not enough, not really. So that's not something I think I should be considered a role model for. I'm always happy to help other people, but being a role model, just I don't see why anyone would want to be like me. Shall we put it that way? Yeah. So don't make me a role model. Find someone realistic, but also someone worthy of being that. And just before I end, I do want to talk about the paucity of role models for men. There are hardly any men in primary school teaching. There's not that many men in other forms of teaching. I did my work experience from school in a primary school. This is many years ago now, of course, obviously, but even there, it was obvious that the little boys needed a male role model, someone around, an example of how to be a man, even though I wasn't a man yet, I was still a teenager. That left a lasting impression on me, and there was a tradition of teaching both sides of my family. And I considered going into it, and I started the kind of preliminaries, looking into doing more work experience as a teacher's aide, things like that. And because I was male, there was a huge amount of suspicion and extra scrutiny that I was put under that made me so insulted and angry that I stopped pursuing that. I don't really have any regrets per se, but I can see how that would scale up and might perhaps explain why so few men work in primary schools or in preschool education. That's about that. I will just now quickly try to answer one of the questions that I got. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below, or send them to me privately by whatever means you so desire, and I'll try to get to them next video. I was asked what I thought about hypergamy. Now, hypergamy is the practice of what you might know as marrying up, in that women, as a demographic, as a whole, not all, tend to look to improve their status, their social standing, their wealth, their security in the partners that they seek. So they are more likely to go for a high-earning, high-status man than they are a low-status, low-earning man, for all that we talk about romantic love and everything else. The statistics do suggest that this is an issue, and this is something we see probably most starkly in the African American community in the United States. Now, this gets tangled in class and wealth issues. I'm not going to take the time to bother to untangle them here, but just bear in mind that this is mostly not really a racial thing, but a wealth and class thing, but it is apparent within this particular racial community, even though it's not that relevant. Okay, so just for sake of argument, we'll use the racial terminology. So a lot of effort has been put in, a lot of money has been put in to providing opportunities for people within the African American community in the United States, particularly when it comes to education. But the main uptake of this has been from black women, who are now some of the most educated, most educationally engaged demographics in the US. The same cannot be said for black men in the US, for various cultural and other reasons, I think. And as a result, there's a lot of tension, it seems, within the African American community, a lot of hatred and antipathy between black women and black men. Black men tend to, it seems, regard black women as being high maintenance, too demanding and so on, and a lot of black men, as a result, perhaps, go off with white women. This aggravates a lot of black women who seem to think that they should be dating them, but at the same time they are less and less willing to settle for men who are less educated, earning less and so on, because their own expectations have been raised by their success in education. Now, I pick this out as an example, even though I know some people are going to take it as being racist or something, but because this is one of the clearest examples of a cultural clash resulting from hypergamy that we have. So I do think that it's a thing, and you can research this for yourself on social media by looking at Black Twitter and so on. But I do think it's more widespread than that community. It's just most visible in that community. And this is something that happens, something that occurs. If women are looking for people to pair off with who are higher status, there's often a lot of complaints from women in New York as well, you know, middle class, upper middle class white women as well, that there's just nobody in their league to date. And that's because women are doing so well in education and men aren't, but we're not addressing that issue. So men can't compete in such numbers on a level that women desire, because they seem to want someone that's, you know, that's equal or better than them. This is one of these things that I think has to change culturally, but it's not easy to change, and trying to engineer cultural change rarely, if ever, works. It has to be a slow, subtle, step-by-step process. But this is something that afflicts men, but the solution lies in women's hands. Why can't you be the main earner? Why can't you be the high status partner? Why do you have to choose someone higher than you? Can't you choose someone lower than you and elevate them and help them to become the best version of themselves, as men are often expected to do the other way around? So yes, I think hypergamy is a thing. I don't think it's quite as responsible for so many social ills as many full-blown men's rights activists seem to think, but it is a thing. And it's a thing that I think needs to be tackled and understood, and that people need to be aware of, and to broaden their definitions of what makes for a good partner, because there's plenty of honour and worthiness in manual labour and so on that these New York socialite white women seem to look down upon. These uptown girls, if you will. Zang.